Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I offer an update on the case of Scott Peterson now that he is being represented by the Los Angeles Innocence Project? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Scott Peterson was born on October 24, 1972, in San Diego, California. As a teenager, he dreamed of being a professional golfer. Scott met a woman named Lacey, and they became romantically involved. They married in 1998 and purchased a house in Modesto, California in October of 2000. Scott worked as a sales representative for a European fertilizer company, and Lacey worked as a substitute teacher on a part-time basis. Scott started an affair with a massage therapist named Amber Fry. At this time, Lacey Peterson was pregnant with a due date of February 10, 2003. She and Scott had named the baby Connor. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On December 24, 2002, at 5:47 p.m., Lacey's stepfather called the police and reported that Lacey was missing. The police made their way to the Peterson house. Here is what they found during the course of their investigation. Scott Peterson claimed that he last saw his wife, Lacey, at 9:30 a.m. Lacey was watching a television show featuring Martha Stewart and preparing to walk their golden retriever, Mackenzie, at a nearby park. Scott left the house and traveled to a warehouse used by the company he worked for. He answered emails and conducted research on the internet before retrieving his aluminum fishing boat, which was stored there. He departed at 11:15 a.m. and arrived at the Berkeley Marina at 12:54 p.m. This marina is about 90 miles west of Modesto. He fished for an hour and a half near Brooks Island before giving up because it was rainy and cold. Scott returned home between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m. and noticed that Lacey was missing. At 5:17 p.m., he called Lacey's mother and stepfather and asked if Lacey was with them. This is what prompted Lacey's stepfather to call the police a half hour later. Investigators did not find any sign of forced entry into the Peterson house, and nothing appeared to be missing. Lacey's purse was found, with her keys still in it. The police soon discovered that Scott was having an affair and previously engaged in 2 other affairs. 2 weeks before Lacey disappeared, he told his current affair partner, Amber, that his wife had died. On April 13, 2003, the body of Lacey's son, Connor, was found in the San Francisco Bay, not far from Brooks Island, where Scott said he had been fishing. The next day, Lacey's body was found about a mile from where her son's body had been found. On April 18, Scott Peterson was arrested near a golf course in La Jolla. He was charged with 2 counts of murder. In his vehicle, the police found survival gear, 4 cell phones, almost $15,000 in cash, camping equipment, Scott's driver's license, his brother's driver's license, and Viagra pills. The discovery led to some stiff questions popping up that were too hard for Scott to answer. The murder trial for Scott Peterson started on June 1, 2004. On November 12, 2004, he was found guilty of murder in the first degree in connection with Lacey's death and murder in the second degree in connection with Connor's death. On March 16, 2005, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. In 2020, Scott's death sentence was overturned. The state decided not to retry the penalty phase. In 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On January 17, 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project filed a motion for post-conviction discovery in the Scott Peterson case. This non-profit project, which has a mission of exonerating the wrongly convicted, argued that a claim of actual innocence is supported by newly discovered evidence. They requested a long list of evidence for their continuing investigation into Scott's case. The filing also contained a declaration made by Scott Peterson, which included the following paragraph. Quote, "I had absolutely nothing to do with the disappearance and deaths of my wife and son. I am not a violent person. I have never had a physical fight with anyone in my life. I am a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record prior to my arrest in this case. I have never had any incident or rule violation report since my wrongful incarceration began in 2003. I did not harm or kill my family." Unquote. Now moving to my analysis. The case of Scott Peterson is highly controversial. Many people believe that he is innocent. They argue the investigation into the murders was deeply flawed, and they point out how members of the jury indicated that Scott's demeanor played a massive role in their decision to find him guilty. The idea that the presence or absence of emotional reactions can be used to infer guilt is not supported by science. Those who believe that Scott is guilty, including the state, argue that although the evidence against Scott is only circumstantial, it is compelling. This brings me to the question, was Scott Peterson guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Scott was having an affair with a woman named Amber at the time Lacey was murdered, and he had a history of infidelity. Scott claimed that there were no problems in his marriage and initially denied having an affair. On December 8, 2002, about 2 weeks before Lacey's disappearance, someone using a device Scott had access to searched the internet for fishing supplies and tidal currents around the area near Brooks Island. On December 9, Scott Peterson purchased his fishing boat. That same day, he told his mistress, Amber, that his wife Lacey was dead, and this would be his first Christmas without her. Later, he told Amber other various lies, like that he was in Paris during a New Year's celebration. On December 23, 2002, the day before Lacey was reported missing, Scott purchased a fishing license which was only valid for 2 days. The same day, Scott told Lacey's sister that he was going to be playing golf the next day. On December 24, Scott went fishing instead of golfing. It was a rainy and cold day, and Scott did not appear to have any idea what he was fishing for. He offered the police non-committal answers when they asked him. Scott indicated that he left his residence at 9:30 a.m., but cell phone records placed him at or near his house at 10:08 a.m. 10 minutes later, a neighbor found the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, wandering on the street wearing a leash. The neighbor returned Mackenzie to the Petersons' backyard. Scott's pickup truck was gone, and Lacey's vehicle was still in the driveway. There were no signs of activity in the house. Perhaps Scott released the dog to make it appear as though Lacey was attacked while walking the dog. A homemade concrete anchor was found in Scott's boat. He told the police that he made the anchor using a 90-pound bag of concrete. The remaining concrete was used to repair his driveway. The police found evidence that Scott had made several concrete anchors. Perhaps he used these anchors to weigh down Lacey's body. After Lacey disappeared, but before her body was found, Scott made several trips back to the marina in various vehicles. He did not go fishing. Rather, he stayed there for a few minutes before leaving. It was almost like Scott was examining the area to make sure that a terrible secret remained concealed. A mitochondrial DNA test revealed that a single strand of hair found in a pair of pliers in Scott's boat belonged to his wife Lacey. Scott's blood was found in his pickup truck. There was an apparent lack of interest on the part of Scott in finding Lacey. He was not interested in hearing any updates about the case and did not appear to be upset. Scott was described as arrogant, irritated, and detached. The Petersons were not in great financial shape. They were living above their means. On the same day the murder victims were identified, Scott made preparations consistent with an escape attempt. It appeared as though he was getting ready to flee to Mexico. Moving to the exculpatory factors, there is a benign explanation for the single strand of hair that was recovered from Scott's boat. A witness had spotted Lacey in the warehouse containing the boat prior to her disappearance. Furthermore, the hair may not have even belonged to Lacey. The mitochondrial DNA test that was used to examine the hair was not reliable. About 20 witnesses reported seeing a person matching the description of Lacey in the neighborhood after Scott had already departed for his fishing trip. Many of the witnesses indicated that she was walking a dog. On December 23, a mysterious individual had stopped at several houses in the Peterson neighborhood asking for money. Some of the neighbors thought the stranger was casing houses to commit burglary. A burglary occurred on the same street as the Peterson house around the time Lacey disappeared. It may have occurred on December 24, the same day she disappeared. The police arrested the burglars. They denied having anything to do with Lacey Peterson and claimed they committed the burglary on December 26. This is unlikely considering the street had been flooded with the media by that time. One theory is that the burglars killed Lacey and disposed of her body in the San Francisco Bay to frame Scott Peterson. A telephone call between two brothers was recorded in a jail in Los Angeles. One brother suggested that one of the burglars threatened Lacey Peterson. Mysteriously, the recording was lost. On December 25, 2002, the day after Lacey was reported missing, an orange van was set on fire in an alley less than a mile from the Peterson house. In the back of the van, the police found a mattress with blood on it. Two witnesses said that they were driving in the area of the Peterson house on December 24 when they saw a pregnant woman next to a white van. An arm reached out of the van and pulled the woman inside. On December 30, 2002, a watch matching the description of one that Scott said that Lacey was wearing on the day she disappeared was sold at a pawn shop. It was sold at another pawn shop on February 14, 2003. As far as Scott's preparations to flee the area, whether he was guilty or not, people usually are not happy about going to prison. Ironically, Scott was accused of preparing to flee to Mexico, a country where escaping from prison is not a crime. When considering all the currently available evidence in this case, do I believe that Scott Peterson is guilty? I believe he is guilty in reality, and I am convinced he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but not by a wide margin. The investigation was terribly mismanaged, and there are other concerns with this case. The case of Scott Peterson is characterized by a good deal of circumstantial evidence that is somewhat convincing, but there is also conflicting evidence. No matter how guilty Scott Peterson looks, it's hard to ignore some of the reports. For example, the burglary, the witnesses who saw Lacey, and these suspicious vans. They may not convince someone that Scott is actually innocent, but these reports could cause reasonable doubt. The strength of the inculpatory factors must be weighed against the exculpatory factors, regardless of how strong the inculpatory factors appear to be. For example, a person could confess to a crime and be thought of as guilty, but if a video appeared of someone else committing that crime, the validity of the confession would be reevaluated. It's important to hear both sides of the argument before making a decision. The controversy in this case is really about how much weight to give the various factors. Are these stories about burglars, sightings of Lacey, and creepy kidnapper vans just reflections, distortions, and distractions caused by intense media coverage? One could argue that when a case is subject to so much coverage, a lot of noise will be created. The signal becomes lost in the noise. On the other hand, perhaps these reports aren't merely ghostly apparitions of a haunted case, but substantial concerns that were ignored because of the anger generated toward Scott Peterson. If even one of those witnesses was correct about Lacey walking her dog after Scott had left, then Scott was not guilty. Does the probability associated with every single witness being incorrect cause reasonable doubt? It is easy to appreciate why this case causes so much controversy, as it glides on a razor's edge between innocence and guilt. Even so, I don't think that Scott Peterson will ever get his conviction overturned, despite receiving assistance from the Los Angeles Innocence Project. The project is striving to keep the criminal justice system honest, but that effort will likely be the only significant outcome from their involvement. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Late on December 23, or early on December 24, 2002, Scott Peterson murdered his wife and unborn child. This was a premeditated crime. Being married was inconvenient to him because he had a mistress. Scott managed to conceal the evidence of his crime fairly well, but he underestimated how angry and suspicious people would become due to his infidelity. In the end, not enough people were willing to buy Scott Peterson's story to keep him out of prison. As it turns out, the guy who made a living selling fertilizer did not effectively sell something that stinks to the public. Those are my thoughts on the case of Scott Peterson. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.